insider trading. I mean, I know that's a strong phrase, but they are able to trade based on information.
And we will break away from this and take you back live to the House floor here on C-SPAN.
The clerk will report the title.
H.R. 3463, a bill to reduce federal spending and the deficit by terminating taxpayer financing of presidential election campaigns and party conventions and by terminating the Election Assistance Commission.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
I have a motion to recommit it to the desk.
Is the gentleman opposed to the bill?
I am in its present form.
The gentleman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Bishop of Georgia moves to recommit the bill, H.R. 3463, to the Committee on House Administration, with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment. Add at the end of the following new section, Section 207, Protections for Elderly, Disabled, and Military Voters. Notwithstanding any provision of this Act or any amendment made by this Act, to the extent that the Election Assistance Commission is responsible for the administration or enforcement of any of the following provisions of law, as of the Commission termination date described in Section 1004A of the Help America Vote Act of 2002, as added by Section 201A, any successor to the Commission shall remain responsible for the administration or enforcement of such provisions after such date. 1. Any provision of law relating to the rights of the elderly to vote and cast ballots in elections for federal office. 2. Any provision of law relating to the rights of the elderly and other individuals who are registered to vote in elections for federal office to obtain absentee ballots in such elections. 3. Any provision of law relating to the access of the elderly, the disabled, and other individuals to polling places in elections for federal office, including the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. 4. Any provision of law relating to the protection of the rights of members of the uniformed services and overseas citizens to vote and cast ballots in elections for federal office, including the Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act. 5. Any other provision of law relating to the protection of the right of citizens of the United States to vote in elections for federal office, including the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his motion.
Mr. Speaker and my colleagues, I offer the final amendment to the bill, which, if adopted, will not kill the bill or send it back to committee. Instead, the bill will proceed to final passage as amended. The purpose of my amendment is simple. It deals with one of our most valuable rights as American citizens. It is a right which many Americans throughout the course of our history have shed blood, sweat, and tears to protect, including our colleague, my dear friend and Representative John Lewis of Georgia. He marched from Selma to Montgomery and endured billy clubs, horses, and tear gas to preserve this sacred right. The right to which I'm referring is the right to vote, as enshrined in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution and further protected in the landmark Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Help America Vote Act of 2002 and various other measures. Today, nearly 5 decades after the Voting Rights Act was signed into law and nearly 10 years since the Help America Vote Act, there is still an unprecedented attack on voting rights in states across this country. Yet, the underlying legislation before the House today would abolish one of the key provisions of the Help America Votes Act, the Election Assistance Commission, which was designed to avoid a repeat of the turmoil surrounding the 2000 presidential election in Florida, where problems with absentee and military ballots played a large role and led to many of these ballots not being counted. If the Commission is abolished, it will undermine Americans' faith in the integrity of our elections. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, more than 5 million Americans in 2012 could be adversely impacted by laws that tighten or restrict voting that were put into effect just this year. The number is larger than the margin of victory in 2 of the last presidential elections. Seniors, the disabled, and our nation's veterans are now being turned away from the polls for not having the required photo identification. Popular reforms like early voting and same-day voter registration are being rolled back. Mr. Speaker, this situation should not be happening in the United States of America today. My final amendment, therefore, is simple. It states that any successor to the Election Assistance Commission shall remain responsible for the administration or enforcement of laws relating to rights of the elderly, the disabled, members of the uniformed services, and overseas citizens to vote and cast ballots in elections for federal office. In signing the Voting Rights Act of 1965, President Lyndon Johnson said that the vote is the most powerful instrument ever devised by man for breaking down injustice and destroying the terrible walls which imprison men because they are different from other men. If this final amendment is approved, we can continue to tear down walls of injustice and ensure that our democracy is open for all Americans to deliberate, to participate, and engage with each other. I urge my colleagues to vote yes, and I yield the balance of my time to my colleague, Representative Marcia Fudge of Ohio.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker and my colleagues, there is no doubt that a concerted voter suppression effort is underway in this nation. Abolishing the Election Assistance Commission, an agency charged with ensuring that the vote of every American counts, is just another step in the voter suppression effort and would completely remove oversight of the most important process in our democracy. Does it make sense to remove oversight at a time when Republican-led legislatures across this nation are passing laws to obstruct voting? No, it absolutely does not. In the first 3 quarters of 2011, 19 new state laws and 2 executive actions were enacted to limit the ability of American citizens to vote. They would make it significantly harder for more than 5 million eligible voters to cast ballots in 2012. Many of the bills, including one signed into law in my home state of Ohio, include the most drastic voter restrictions since before the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Seniors will be denied their right to the franchise. The disabled will find it more difficult to vote. Minorities and students will face more challenges than ever before. Soldiers honorably serving our country will be left with their absentee ballots uncounted. And let's not forget the people who died for our right to vote. People were slain to create the rights we enjoy today. This determined effort is really about targeting a specific population of eligible voters to change the outcome of the 2012 elections. Plain and simple, H.R. 3463 is yet another voter suppression tactic. Join me today in supporting this final amendment to guarantee the right of every American citizen to cast their vote. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Mississippi seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to this motion.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I'm amazed that an argument could be made that in any way the elimination of the EAC would result in disenfranchising any voter. We all believe that every person who should vote, that needs to vote, that's allowed to vote, that wants to vote, should be allowed to do so. I'd like to point out that all of those that are speaking in opposition that were here in 2002 when HAVA passed voted for HAVA. And in HAVA, it contained the provision that created the EAC, which was only supposed to last for 3 years. This is not a complicated lift to do away with this. Does that mean when they voted for this in 2002 that they were trying to disenfranchise voters? Obviously not. In no way is this intended to do anything but clean up an agency that has an average employee salary of $106,000 a year, has been sued for political discrimination, problems with military, an agency that cannot be corrected but needs to be eliminated. I urge my colleagues to vote against this motion to recommit and to support this bill.
The gentleman yields back.
Yield back.
Without objection, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The noes have it. The motion is not agreed to.
Speaker, I ask for the ayes and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the Chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of passage.
Well, if you've ever paid federal taxes, or even if you haven't, if you've seen a 1040 tax form, you've seen the box that says check here if you or your spouse filing jointly want $3 to go to this fund, the Presidential Election Campaign Fund. Under Greg Harper's bill, that fund would be eliminated, as would be the Election Assistance Commission, which was created after the 2000 campaign in order to help states update their voting systems. A couple of votes here, and we're going to take your phone calls in just a moment. This first one is a motion to recommit, and final passage vote is next. We're going to ask you if you think the federal fund should be eliminated, and you can tell us if you've ever checked off that box contributing to the campaign fund. Here are the numbers to call. If you are a Republican, the number is 202-585-3885. For Democrats, it's 202-585-3886. All others, 202-585-3887. Make sure that you turn down your television when you call in. If you've called in C-SPAN in the last 30 days, give others a chance to call in this afternoon. We'll get to your phone calls in just a moment. Again, this first vote, 15 minutes. This is a motion to recommit made by Democrat Sanford Bishop of Georgia, which would require the continued protection of elderly, disabled, military voters, notwithstanding the termination of the Election Assistance Commission. Before we get to your phone calls, we're going to get an update on this bill from a Capitol Hill reporter. Ben Pershing is with the Washington Post and covers Congress. Why do House Republicans want to end public funding of presidential campaigns?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. The most basic one is they think that the money that's currently being used to fund presidential campaigns could be used to chip away at the deficit. But the broader argument that House Republicans make is that the system simply isn't working. Fewer and fewer Americans are choosing to check the little box on their tax returns offering to contribute money to the fund, and they think fewer and fewer candidates going forward are even going to use the public money. So at this point, Republicans argue that the system just isn't useful anymore.
How would Representative Harper's bill specifically do that? How would it end the campaign?
It's a very straightforward bill. It would simply abolish the campaign fund that currently exists that money goes into, and it would take the money that's left in it and send it over to the Treasury to chip away at the deficit. No sort of half measure, no changing the program, simply abolishing it altogether, no more public financing of presidential campaigns, period.
So they see it as kind of a deficit reduction measure, too? How much money is left in the campaign fund?
Roughly $200 million is in the fund right now, and so if there were candidates wanting to take it in 2012, they would get something less than $100 million each. There's some complicated formulas that determine how primary candidates and general election candidates get money. But at the moment, there's something around $200 million in the account.
In your Washington Post article, you wrote about another bill by Tom Cole that passed the House back in January. Why are they back at it again with a similar measure?
It's a good question. I think one of the reasons they're at it right now is that this bill does this. It gets rid of presidential campaign financing, and then it also has a separate part that gets rid of something called the Election Assistance Commission. Not to get into a lot of details, but basically that commission gives out grants to states to help them modernize their voting systems. And Republicans also would like to get rid of that. So what they did was combine two of their goals into one bill, and that's what this bill does.
Well, what's Democrats' biggest argument in favor of keeping the system as it is or improving it?
Well, Democrats in general support the idea of public financing, not just the presidential elections, but some even would like to have more public financing of congressional elections. And their argument is the more public money is available to candidates, the less time and effort they have to spend raising money from private sources, and the less influence special interests and outsiders might have on the process. So some Democrats have actually proposed an alternative bill that would put more money into the system, not less, and they think maybe that would lure more people back into the system, more candidates.
Well, specifically in the last presidential election, 2008, how did it all work out? What did President Obama do? How about Senator McCain?
Well, what President Obama did was he opted out of taking matching money during the primaries, which a lot of people expected because that had been going on for a while. But then Obama really made history by also opting out of the general election. So what happened there was that Obama opted out of it. He raised hundreds of millions of dollars for the general election. And McCain chose to stay in the system. McCain's a longtime campaign finance reformer, as you know. He stayed in the system. He got $84 million in public money from the FEC, but in exchange he had to agree to only spend that amount. So what happened was functionally that Obama was able to spend a lot more money than McCain could.
Well, you also point out in your article that the bill would also end the public funding of national conventions. Are the RNC and the DNC on board with that?
Well, it's not clear what they support. They have actually both already accepted money for the 2012 conventions. Republicans are going to meet in Tampa, and Democrats are going to meet in Charlotte. They've already each gotten $18 million from the FEC to help stage those conventions. So what's funny about that is that Democrats have a bill that would also get rid of public money for conventions. So in some sense, you'd think both parties are in agreement on that, and yet both parties have already taken money for next year. Now, 2016, it's an open question. It may be by that point both parties have agreed not to take any more money.
Look for Ben Pershing's In Session column in WashingtonPost.com. He covers Congress and more. We thank you for that update.
Thank you.
The first of two votes here on the elimination of the Presidential Campaign Fund. This is a procedural vote. Final passage is next. So let's get right to your calls and what you think about the issue. Shirley is in Olmsted, Ohio. Republican caller. Go ahead.
Yes, I say vote against it. Eliminate it. They don't need any more money.
So you would vote in favor of the bill. Have you ever checked off that box, Shirley?
No.
Janet is next on our Democrats line in Port Richey, Florida.
Yes, I have checked off that box for 20 or more years, however long it's been. I have checked off that box, and I say vote against the bill in order to keep the federal oversight of federal elections. Having lived through the 2000 election debacle here in Florida, I'm very much in favor of any federal oversight that can be summoned.
And Shirley Janet pointing out the Election Assistance Commission, which was created after the 2000 election, that too would be eliminated under this bill. Here's Gilbert, Arizona, and Carol's on our Republican line. Hi there.
Yes, I say get rid of it. After President Obama went back on his word when he was going to take the fund along with Senator McCain, and then he flip-flopped on that, as you all remember. He signed the thing and everything, and then he was raising so much money from Wall Street that he said no. And so, I mean, it's just why even do it? I mean, so a person says they're going to do it, so the other person's going to do it. It just hasn't worked out. I mean, if you just went in and finally put down and said, okay, this is the only way you get the money, each one of you get $100 million, that's it, go for it. But since it doesn't do that, and I think since President Obama raised, now he's going to raise, what does he want, $1 billion this time? Throw this out. This is a joke. I mean, who in the heck could run a campaign for $100 million when the President of the United States is already raising, how many stops has he had? Just 3 last night? I mean, this is a joke. So that's all he is. So, but he flip-flopped on that, and it's amazing. The media doesn't talk about that, do they?
Thanks, Carol. Let's hear from Bobby in Tallahassee, Florida, on our Democrats line.
Hi, how you doing? I actually have crossed it off my taxes one time, and that was for Bill Richardson when he ran for president. Didn't do him very much good, but I still did it one time. I think federal oversight is good. I think any time that you're able to level the playing field, especially when it comes to campaign finance, that's good. And I would just like to say that everybody that's been talking on the phone has come from different levels of intensity as far as their viewpoint is concerned. And I would just like to say that the one common denominator is that everybody is seeking fair elections where people's voices can be heard, and that you don't have to raise hundreds and millions of dollars to be able to run a fair campaign. So,
Bobby, thank you for your comments. So we'll get back to your calls in a moment. Ben Pershing, the Washington Post reporter, had mentioned that President Obama raised some $750 million in his last campaign, and John McCain took $84 million from the FEC in that 2008 campaign. He also writes that the Obama campaign did not respond to a request for a comment, but there's little reason to expect that he will take what the FEC offers for the general election. He's talking about 2012, which is less than $100 million. Independent line is next. Pat in Houston. Hi. Houston.
I don't understand why people would object to anyone that voluntarily selects the box.
I selected it, but that was back when it was $1. This, I don't understand. The lady that just called, she was more interested in bashing the president and what he's doing instead of the question that's on the vote. I mean, that just tells you what's going on today. It's really sad.
Would you support something, Pat, like that all candidates had to take the federal money? Is that something you support?
You know what? We would be in better shape if that's all they took, because all of these people, all of these little groups is raising money to pay off the congressman or to get them selected. If they would cut that out, that would be great.
Let's go to, let's hear from Les in Bon Air, Georgia, Republican line.
Good
Welcome.
afternoon.
Good afternoon to you, too.
I'm definitely against it. If they would take only this money and divide it up, take nobody else's money and use this only, that'd be fine. I could watch television a little bit more. But I'm against giving either party the money. And if they keep it, put it in the put it towards the debt.
The bill that the House will vote on next would eliminate the Election Assistance Commission. It would also terminate the Presidential Campaign Fund and end federal support of national campaigns as well. The Associated Press reports today that Democrats say they're planning an unprecedented effort to protect voting rights in the 2012 election after several states passed voter identification laws and restrictions on early voting and same-day registration. DNC Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Congresswoman from Florida, says the party will oppose obstacles, quote, essentially designed to rig an election when Republicans can't win these elections on the merits. That's from Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Here is Greg in Sherman Oaks, California, on our Democrats line. Hi there.
Hello. This attempt to wipe out the Presidential Election Campaign Fund is just preposterous and astounding. This is one more example of how the Republican Party wants to make America the sole possession of the 1%. We should be moving in exactly the opposite direction.
But Greg, how do you go in that opposite direction when the president himself last time raised well above that and didn't use the campaign fund?
Well, he was taking his competitive advantage as a popular candidate. I didn't like it. I understand why he did it, and after so many years of Republican rule, I was glad to see him win. But we need to shore up the entire future, and this campaign fund should be shored up, increased, and a fund for all federal offices should appear on our income tax forms as a checkoff. And by the way, some years ago, somebody told me that one reason this fund hasn't been supported more vigorously is that the default on TurboTax and the other computerized tax form programs, the default is an unchecked box. So it's the irresponsibility of companies. I don't know why they had that default unchecked. I don't know, but it's just there's so many ways this country moves in the wrong direction, and here is one more happening right in front of our eyes. I can't believe that the American people are going to go along with this Republican attempt to just further put the funding of elections in the hands of corporate money and big money. It's why this country, for example, is on the wrong side of climate change.
All right, Greg, thanks for that. In reporting about the bill, Ben Pershing of the Washington Post that reports that, according to the IRS, the number of people checking off that box has dropped from nearly 20% in 1990 to 12% in 2000 to less than 7% in 2010. Here's Rudy on our Republican line, Madison Heights, Michigan. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm against the campaign funding. I think you should eliminate that office. I mean, that particular procedure altogether. That and plus the Voters Protection Agency. There's so much money being sent, and there's too many people handling it all kinds of ways, and I don't think any of it really goes towards the intent that was expressed. And as far as TurboTax having defaults, it's not that. People are no longer interested because it makes no difference if you check it or not. There's going to be ways of filtering either way, however they may decide.
Let's go to our independent line next to Oakland, California, Oakland, Oregon, and Laura's there.
Hello, this is Laura, and I'm a tribal chief, and I've got a three-part plan for the next presidential election. Number one, we need equal vote. One person, one vote. Number two, the committees need to go back to the people, and that would get all these loose ends tied up. And number three, that the debt is negotiated so that we can actually know how much money we have and how much money we have to give to candidates. The candidates all should also be given the same amount so that there's an equal race. Without an equal race for the presidency, all we're going to have is a manipulated type system.
Let's go to Beaumont, Texas. On our Democrats line is Belinda. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Belinda, and I'm for the tax on the campaign. I think it's equal rights to have the campaign. And
well, how do you, Belinda? How do you get more people to participate? How you heard the figures about fewer people checking off that box, less money coming into the federal campaign, and fewer candidates taking that. How would you think they could improve that?
Well, we could have like more fundraisers, a fund like maybe a racing fundraiser, like a walking fundraiser, parade fundraiser, something like that.
Diana is next up. Republican line in Loudonsboro, Alabama. Hi.
Yes, hi. I am against the funding of the presidential election campaign. I am for eliminating all funding of wasteful programs like this that spend so much money on administrative costs and just do not do what they're supposed to do. I think the money should be returned to bring down the debt. We have a real problem, and also I believe we should have photo ID to vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Vicki is in Philadelphia on our Democrats line. Should federal funds be eliminated?
Hi.
The campaign, presidential campaign fund. Hi, Vicki.
Hi. I don't think it should be eliminated, but I also think that there should be a better way to opt into it. I know for a long time, when I was younger and I did my own taxes, I really didn't understand that box, checking that box.
Did you feel like it was going to increase your tax when you checked it off?
Yes, I did. And so,
even though it says right there, this will not increase your taxes.
well, like I said, I was a lot younger then, and I think when you're younger, you don't really stop to pay attention with some things. So I think it should be kept, but one of the things I think should go along with it is you should have to take it. You shouldn't be allowed to raise any money on your own. We should try to shore it up, make it stronger, fund, and it should be for any election, not just presidential.
Well, a bit of a setback in Washington today on the fundraising front. The Federal Election Commission ruled unanimously that Republican Senator Mike Lee of Utah could not raise unlimited amounts of money to influence election. Associated Press writes that he heads the Constitutional Conservatives Fund Political Action Committee. It had asked the FEC whether it could receive limitless amounts of cash from corporations and labor unions, effectively making it the first so-called super PAC run by an elected official. The FEC said today in its 6-0 decision that leadership PACs, which help other members of Congress get elected, are controlled directly by a candidate for federal office and are bound by contribution limits. Here's Gerald in St. Augustine, Florida, on our Independence line. Hi.
Yes, sir. On this, you have to understand, and everybody needs to listen very carefully. To get $1 from the federal government, they will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in bloated offices, bloated money that they pay these people is insane. So you might spend the $5 million to get $20. That's the way the federal government works.
Rudy is next, Republican line in, I'm sorry, it's Judy in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky, Republican caller. I apologize. Go ahead, Judy.
Yeah, I feel like we give on our own. I mean, I know I give to politicians that I want to see get into office. I would like to see this thing taken off of my tax form, and if they want to put something useful on there, maybe like one of the callers said, pay down the debt. Also, the voter ID, everyone that votes should have an ID, and no one in this country that is a citizen, I don't believe would not be without an ID, even if you don't drive. Most people have some form of ID, and also the unions have their PACs that they take money out of people's checks and contribute to these funds. Isn't that like what they're talking about, these private companies that put money in?
Thanks, Judy. A couple more calls here as this vote winds down. Carol is in McKinney, Texas, a Democratic caller.
Yes, I would like to see it voted down due to the fact that they are trying to do away with the improvement of election commissions in localities and states, which I think is very important, especially after you hear about some of the disasters we've had in the voting in Ohio, Florida, and other states. The problem, I think, too, with having any kind of presidential campaign fund is that there's so much money being raised by lobbyists and PACs, it doesn't really matter.
Let's get one more call here. Republican line. Bob is in Erie, Pennsylvania.
Hi. I have, ever since the 80s, I believe, not wanted to check off that box. And I think we should eliminate it. The way I've seen it is that as an active participant in the process, I've been involved in Democrat and Republican campaigns most of my life, mostly Republican since 1980. I see the funding that is provided by people that donate and even CAPS and other organizations like that as being a competition of ideas. And that's what we need. And I'm also concerned that if we have the government controlling too much of it, like congressional campaigns and that the ability of third-party people to run will be minimized.
Bob, thanks for your opinion. Thanks for all the calls. Again, the final passage of the bill is coming up next. The bill that would end the presidential election campaign fund, as will it will end the presidential primary matching payment account. That's what's financed by your $3 checkoff on the tax form. It also eliminate the Federal Election Election Assistance Commission, rather, and that was formed after the 2000 elections. This is the motion to recommit vote. Final passage vote is coming up next.
R 190, and the nays are 230. Is not adopted.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess votes no. Mr. Gingrey of Georgia. Mr. Gingrey of Georgia votes no.
Members voted. Does any member wish to change a vote? On this vote, the ayes are 190 and the nays are 236. The motion is not adopted. The question is on the passage of the bill. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. For what purpose does the member from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
I ask for a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
This is the final passage vote on the bill that ends the Election Assistance Commission, also ending taxpayer funding of presidential election campaigns. We expect the House to move on next to a bill requiring federal agencies to review existing regulations and expanding the ability of small businesses to challenge federal regulations. Over in the Senate, they continue work on the defense authorization bill, with a final passage vote likely later today. A short while ago, they rejected Senator Barbara Feinstein's amendment to the bill that would limit mandatory military custody to suspected terrorists captured outside of the United States. 45 in favor, 55 voting against.
yeas are 235 and the nays are 190. The bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on H.R. 527.
Without objection. Pursuant to the House Resolution 477 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House in the Committee of the Whole on the State of the Union for consideration of House H.R. 527. The Chair appoints the gentleman from California, Mr. Denham, to preside over the Committee of the Whole.
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the consideration of H.R. 527, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to amend Chapter 6 of Title 5, United States Code, commonly known as the Regulatory Flexibility Act, to ensure complete analysis of potential impacts on small entities of rules and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read the first time. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, with 40 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary, and 20 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Small Business. The gentleman for Texas, Mr. Smith, and the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, each will control 20 minutes. The gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Graves, and the gentleman from New York, Ms. Velasquez, each will control 10 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, I believe that the House is not in order.
The House will be in order. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, America's economic recovery remains sluggish, with the unemployment rate still at 9%. Jobs are the key to economic recovery, and small businesses are the primary job creators in America. A study for the Small Business Administration found that regulations cost the American economy $1.75 trillion annually, or over $15,000 per household.
Mr. Chairman, the House is not in order.
The gentleman is correct. The House is not in order. Please take your discussions outside. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, while job creators suffer under the weight of these regulations, federal employees are busily writing even more to implement the mandates of new laws like Obamacare and Dodd-Frank. The same study also found that the cost of regulatory compliance is disproportionately higher for small businesses. This hurts their ability to create jobs for Americans. Last month, a Gallup poll found that small business owners consider, quote, complying with government regulations, end quote, as the most important problem they face. On February 8, 2011, I introduced H.R. 527, the Regulatory Flexibility Improvements Act of 2011, to provide urgently needed help to small businesses. Mr. Graves and Mr. Coble are original co-sponsors, along with the bill's 24 additional co-sponsors. This bill primarily reinforces the Regulatory Flexibility Act of 1980 and the Small Business Regulatory Enforcement Fairness Act of 1996. It only requires agencies to do what current law and common sense dictate that they should be doing. Current law requires agencies to prepare a regulatory flexibility analysis so agencies will know how a proposed regulation will affect small businesses before it is adopted. But the Government Accountability Office has found in numerous studies that agencies are not always adhering to these laws. For example, current law allows an agency to avoid preparing a regulatory flexibility analysis if the agency head certifies that the new rule will not have a significant economic impact on a substantial number of small businesses. But these terms are not defined in the law, and agencies routinely take advantage of this and fail to prepare any analysis. The bill fixes this problem by requiring the Small Business Administration to define these terms uniformly for all agencies. Also, it requires agencies to justify a certification in detail and to give the legal and factual grounds for the certification. And this bill restricts agencies' ability to weigh the Regulatory Flexibility Act's requirements. The legislation also requires agencies to document all economic impacts, direct and indirect, that a new regulation could have on small businesses. Agencies already must account for indirect economic impacts under the National Environmental Policy Act. Small businesses deserve the same level of scrutiny. This bill assures that small businesses will have a voice in the regulatory process. Currently, only 3 agencies, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, must consult with small business advocacy review panels before issuing new major regulations. Building on this, the bill requires all agencies to use advocacy review panels. Equally important, this bill strengthens requirements that agencies review and improve existing regulations whenever possible to lower the burden on small business. It enhances the Small Business Administration's ability to comment on and help shape major rules. It assures that the law is uniformly implemented so agencies cannot interpret their way out of its requirements. And the bill improves judicial review. Some critics of regulatory reform may claim that this bill undermines agencies' ability to issue new regulations. On the contrary, the bill only strengthens the existing law with carefully tailored common sense reforms. Especially in light of current economic conditions, this bill is a timely and logical step to protect small businesses from over-regulation. Like the Regulatory Flexibility Act of 1980 and the Small Business Regulatory Enforcement Fairness Act of 1996, the Regulatory Flexibility Improvements Act of 2011 recognizes that economic growth ultimately depends on job creators, not regulators. The economy is already on shaky footing. It is more important than ever for regulators to look before they leap to impose more regulations. I urge my colleagues to support the bill, and I'll reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I would yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I would just like to point out that the Crane study referred to already by the distinguished chairman of the committee, apparently he hasn't found out that it's been held in error in a number of ways, but mostly by the Crane study people themselves, who said that their analysis was not meant to be a decision-making tool for lawmakers or federal regulatory agencies to use in choosing the right level of regulation. In other words, the study is flawed because it fails to account for any benefits of regulation, so that I want everybody to feel that this correction about $1.75 trillion has been thoroughly debunked by not only CRS but other authorities as well. Now, this debate follows a number of pieces of legislation that we're considering. It's sort of a regulation tidal wave or anti-regulation tidal wave. H.R. 310, regulatory accountability. H.R. 10, which we will see soon, the REINS Act, and H.R. 5227, the bill before us now, the Regulatory Flexibility Improvements Act. Now, it's strange to say that this trio of public safety-killing legislation would make it harder to control and make safe our products that we count on. Under the law presently, rulemaking must make an analysis for every new rule and that would have significant economic impact on small businesses. Among other things, the bill would repeal the authority that allows the agency to waive or delay this analysis in response to even an emergency. It's hard to imagine how the bill under consideration would make regulations more cumbersome, would take longer, would risk national emergencies, and would lose a lot of the safety and health protections that we now enjoy. I feel that there hasn't been careful consideration of what the real final goal is. Now, the Wall Street Journal, no enemy of big business, said, and I quote, the main reason United States companies are reluctant to step up hiring is scant demand rather than uncertainty over government policies. And so even the business community recognizes that the big problem about our economy is not that rules are tying up businesses, but that we don't have enough people buying because they don't have enough jobs to create the demand. And so what we're doing here today, if you examine it carefully, as many on our Committee on the Judiciary have done, you will find that the safety standards, which we are really very proud of, are going to be compromised in a very embarrassing way. Regulations don't kill jobs, they save lives. And there are plans underway, and this is one of them, here in the House to undermine the regulatory process that guarantees the health and the safety of millions of Americans. I urge all of the members of the House to carefully consider the direction of this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'll yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Coble, who is the chairman of the Courts, Commercial, and Administrative Law Subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I thank the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, for having yielded to me. Mr. Chairman, those who oppose H.R. 527 insist that those of us who support it are willing to compromise health and safety standards. Such criticism is not justified. We simply are refining the process. Excessive regulations and bad regulations serve no good purpose. My district is not unlike many others. We're still suffering from the recession, and while we once claimed many manufacturing and producing distinctions, much of our manufacturing has either disappeared or gone to other places. Bad regulations don't help matters. They create unnecessary costs, uncertainty for employers, and do not improve public health or safety, and they are particularly burdensome for small businesses. Two critical laws that help ensure regulators will take into account the impact of proposed regulations on small businesses are the Regulatory Flexibility Act and the Small Business Regulatory Enforcement Fairness Act. In essence, these laws require agencies to conduct economic impact analysis of proposed rules on small businesses. Unfortunately, regulators routinely utilize waivers and exceptions from both laws and promulgate regulations without taking into account their economic impact on small businesses. The Regulatory Flexibility Act and the Small Business Regulatory Enforcement Fairness Act do not block the flow of federal regulation. They rather help guide it. We need regulations and small businesses need regulations, but the regulations must be effective and efficient or they can do more harm than good. H.R. 527 will improve future regulations by requiring agencies to conduct economic impact analysis of proposed regulations on small businesses before they are implemented. In doing so, it will enhance the basic requirements of the Regulatory Flexibility Act and the Small Business Enforcement Fairness Act and extend the advocacy review panel requirements to all agencies, including all of the independent agencies. The Administrative Procedures Act was not intended to create a regime whereby executive agencies would implement regulations without recourse. Fortunately, there are countless situations where agencies have implemented rules and regulations that are unnecessary, redundant, or unjustifiably costly. H.R. 527 will help ensure that agencies do not overlook the critical interests of small businesses and help prevent agencies from promulgating wasteful regulations. Finally, the Congressional Budget Office estimated that H.R. 527 will cost $80 billion between 2012 and 2016. Although there may not be a quantifiable means to assess the benefits of H.R. 527, from the perspective of a small business, they are indeed priceless. Also, it's important to note that among many others, the National Taxpayers Union, the National Association of Independent Business, the United States Chamber of Commerce, and the National Association of Manufacturers have endorsed H.R. 527. H.R. 527 is critical for small businesses, Mr. Chairman, and will not impede the ability of agencies to promulgate regulations. This is good government legislation. We do not need more regulation. We need better regulations, which is exactly what H.R. 527 will achieve. And I urge support and final passage of this bill, and thank the gentleman from Texas again for having yielded, and I yield back.